Alright guys, welcome back to another one. So we've got some Stellar Blade news to talk about. In fact, quite the juicy scoop, as yesterday Shift Up silently confirmed that a Stellar Blade sequel is in fact confirmed and will be releasing before or within 2027. This was concreted during one of their recent financial reports for investors, showing us a timeline of what the company plans on doing between 2024 and 2027. Throughout last year, Shift Up had mentioned that a sequel was under consideration, just depending on how the reception of Stellar Blade went, and considering that this game was pretty successful for the company and that it seems pretty beloved in amongst the community, this has clearly urged Shift Up to begin development on a brand new Stellar Blade, which here in this timeline, it appears that it's planned to release before Project Witches. For those of you who don't know, Project Witches is the code name for Shift Up's other major video game that's currently in development, beginning development last year. It's described as being a AAA urban sci-fi action RPG that will have cross-platform capabilities between console, mobile, and PC. Basically, this game sounds like it's going to be along the lines of Wuthering Waves or Genshin Impact. Now, while Shift Up already have a very successful live server gacha title over on mobile phones, Goddess of Fate, Nikke.
It's actually Goddess of Victory, Nikke. Come on, bro, get it right.
It's clear that these guys are wanting to start competing with the big names in this space of the industry. And I believe that's exactly what Project Witches is. There are so many games like this currently in development, as a lot of Eastern developers are starting to notice the success of these games. Shift Up are a company that are quite familiar with this model though, through their experience with Nikke over many years, along with also closely studying this genre of game. As we can clearly see in this financial report, this is something that they pay close attention to, so it's not surprising that they want to chuck their hat into the ring and give something like this a try. Shift Up are planning on spending $75 million for the development of this game, which comparatively, if we look at something like Genshin, it was reported that the initial budget for that game was around about 100 mil. So if Project Witches truly is a Genshin-like game, I do feel as if Shift Up have a pretty good chance of this title to be a frontrunner in amongst Wuthering and Genshin. Of course, between now and 2027 though, there is a lot more competition on its way, so it's going to be really interesting to see what that area of the gaming industry is going to look like by the time Project Witches launches, as people are going to have so many options when it comes to these open world action RPG live service gacha game. From the description we have of Project Witches though, it's certainly sounding along the lines of Ananta, which was previously known as Project Mugen. I'm hoping that Shift Up will lean more towards the direction of fantasy rather than GTA slice of life that Ananta is clearly trying to go for here. And of course we can expect the Shift Up trademarks. I don't actually have to mention what the trademarks are. Everyone knows what the trademarks are of Shift Up stuff. However, Project Witches is slated to receive some new information as stated by Shift Up last year in the first half of 2025. So unless plans have changed, we should hopefully have our first look, or at least have some substantial information about this game by next month. However, with seeing that Shift Up's current plan is to release the Stellar Blade sequel around the same time as Project Witches, I would say that right now the tentative plan would be for these games to launch in 2027. I don't think there is a sufficient amount of development time for both of these projects to release, let's say sometime in 2026, as that's only next year. That is an insane case of efficiency if that truly does end up happening. It would mean that by the time of release in 2027, these games will have been in development for around about 4 years. It was mentioned last year that Shift Up's plans are to add a new project development every 2 to 3 years, expecting each of these projects to have a development period of anywhere between 4 to 5 years. So they're basically wanting the company to have this consistent stream of projects always being in development and always releasing. And of course, games like Nikke fuel the development of further projects coming from Shift Up, as it's a constant stream of revenue. This is why I think looking at Project Witches, it's also important to act as an almost cash cow for Shift Up alongside Nikke. I think that something like Project Witches will end up appealing more to a broader audience compared to Nikke. So I think Project Witches is important so long as it is quality upon release to assist with raising funds for future projects from the company. Looking at Nikke, a bulk portion of Stellar Blade's development was likely fueled from the countless amounts of kaching dollars that people have spent on sexy anime military girls. It's exciting to know though that Stellar Blade is going to continue, and clearly it's going to become a flagship IP for Shift Up. I absolutely loved my time with Stellar Blade. It was one of my favorites throughout 2024. It's this awesome blend of traditional character-driven hack and slash mixed in with some Souls-like elements. The world and story, while beautiful, drop-dead gorgeous most of the time, the actual narrative here was a little bit cliche, a little bit to be expected, and runs along the same vein as something like Nier Automata. Not saying it's a bad thing, I think they've got a really good foundation, and there is room for improvement here in the sequel. One thing I hope they absolutely address is making more memorable and interesting characters. It's probably the biggest issue I had with the game, to be honest. I didn't walk away from Stellar Blade with all of these characters bobbling around in my head thinking, oh yeah, good old Tony down in Shion's repair shop was absolutely hilarious. Most of the characters you came across, well, they all looked really cool from a character design standpoint. They've got that down on pat, but the actual personalities just felt a little bit bland and flat to me. I also really hope they take a completely different approach to the side quests of the game, because most of them throughout Stellar Blade, while there are some cool ones with some little funny quirks to go along with them with the mini side stories, just kind of felt meaningless, and returning back to previously explored locations just to kill one thing or pick up one item to then return it, it just got uninteresting after a while. I was simply just doing these for completionist sake. However, we have to keep in mind that Stellar Blade was Shift Up's very first AAA console entry they had ever attempted. Previous to that, it's all mobile games looking at Nikke, so I think they did a stellar he's so funny attempt at their very first game like this. It'll also be quite interesting to see where Shift Up take the story from the end of the first game. The game does have 3 separate endings. This comes down to making one of 2 choices at the end of the game, and a third ending can depend on your completion. Now, you'd have to imagine that the canon true ending here for the game would be the Making New Memories ending, where we see Eve fuse with Adam to kind of continue the biblical connections and references that Stellar Blade is quite clearly putting on display to form a brand new world for humanity. They both fuse into one being with a shared goal to restore Earth back to its former glory. Only this now means that Mother Sphere is a threat. Now, even though Eve is technically half Naytiba, I don't think this would rule out the Naytiba being continued enemies for the sequel. Most of them are completely feral and have basically zero intelligence, so I don't think it would be a case that we side with the Naytiba. Sure, the intelligent ones that aren't completely feral, but I think they will still remain to be an enemy for the sequel game, though the main antagonist now is rather who used to be our allies, the androids and Mother Sphere. This makes the most sense to me based on how the other 2 endings play out. I don't think they leave much room for a sequel. Also, because this is looking like a 2027 release, it's probably going to release on PlayStation 6, though no doubt Shift Up will probably still drop it on PS5. Stellar Blade was developed on UE4, so I'd have to imagine that they'll end up developing the sequel, and likely also Project Witches as well, on Unreal Engine 5. Can't wait to see the new technology, you know, of what they brew up with UE5 in 2027 for Stellar Blade 2. You know, it's next gen, a lot to look forward to. Can't wait to see how the anti-aliasing improves, and the texture fidelity, that's probably going to improve too. Maybe adjustments to the parry system. I think even my bird's excited. That's crazy. Hell yeah, a lot of new. However, it's just exciting to know that this is expanding. This is something that is going to continue, and to see how Shift Up are going to push the ideas they had for the first game even further. As we all know, video game sequels are generally really good when looking at the number 2. One other thing that's mentioned here in the plans is platform expansion. We know that in a few weeks' time, Stellar Blade is arriving on PC. And I do hope that the folks over at the Mod Nexus are preparing for this day to come, because they're about to see some NSFW mods they've never experienced before. I'm telling you right now, Stellar Blade coming to PC is going to be a waypoint in gaming history. I'm predicting that by comparison, the NSFW mods for the Final Fantasy VII Nexus is going to look like Child's Play compared to Stellar Blade. Anyway, that's coming to PC very shortly. It's going to come with some new content, in fact 25 additional outfits. Along with that, there's also going to be a brand new boss fight where we verse Man. But is it possible that the platform expansion could also extend into Nintendo Switch 2? Maybe this is something that might get revealed in June. Before people start twisting my nipples saying that there's no way Stellar Blade would run on Switch 2, folks, have you seen the recently released Cyberpunk 2077 gameplay for Switch 2? It is gorgeous. With a few optimizations from Shift Up, I don't have a single doubt that Stellar Blade, in some shape or form, would be able to run on Switch 2. That's a pretty big update for Shift Up and Stellar Blade. I'm definitely excited to see if Project Witches does get officially unveiled next month. This is something that could potentially happen at Summer Games Fest. However guys, that's all for today. Be sure to leave your thoughts and opinions down below. Are you looking forward to a sequel of Stellar Blade, and what would you like to see? Be sure to slap that like button, it helps me out more than you know. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. A big thank you to my wonderful patrons. I hope you're all having a fantastic day, guys, and we'll talk again real soon.